The morning mist clung to the pasture like my family's doubts clung to their words. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the cattle move slowly through the dawn light, their breath creating small clouds in the cool air. Just isn't ready for this kind of responsibility. My father's voice rumbled over his coffee cup. Running cattle alone? That's a man's job, always has been. My uncle nodded. Takes years to learn the ways of the herd. Can't just wake up one day and think you understand them? I'd heard these words so many times, they'd become background noise. But today felt different. Today, something inside me shifted, like a gear finally clicking into place. The ranch had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it from nothing. My father expanded it, and now it was time for the next chapter. The problem was, nobody believed I could write it. "I'm taking the North Pasture," I announced, my voice cutting through their conversation. The kitchen fell silent. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me, expressions ranging from surprise to something that looked almost like pity. "Now hold on there," my father started, but I was already reaching for my hat. The North Pasture stretched out before me like an ocean of grass. I'd walked these fields 1,000 times, but never with the weight of responsibility sitting so heavily on my shoulders. The cattle were scattered across the landscape, black and brown dots moving slowly through the green. My horse, Thunder, shifted beneath me, sensing my nervousness. He was an old gelding, steady and reliable. "Well, boy," I whispered, patting his neck, "it's just you and me now." The plan was simple: move the cattle from the North Pasture to the holding pen, then sort them for market. In practice, it was like choreographing a dance with 200 partners who had their own ideas. I started at the far end, using Thunder to push a small group toward the others. The cattle moved reluctantly, stopping to graze every few steps. One old bull turned to stare at me with what I could only describe as skepticism. "I know what you're thinking," I told him. "You don't think I can do this either." The bull snorted and turned away, but he started moving in the right direction. Small victory. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat, and my throat felt like sandpaper. But slowly, gradually, the cattle began to move as one unit toward the barn. By noon, I had them all in the holding pen. Success in the holding pen felt good, but I knew it was just the beginning. Real cattle ranching was about understanding them, reading their behavior like a language most people never bothered to learn. I spent the next week in the pastures, watching and learning. Each animal had its own personality. The lead cow, a sturdy Holstein mix I named Boss Lady, always grazed at the highest point, keeping watch. The young bulls liked to test boundaries, pushing against fences. The old-timers at the feed store had plenty to say about my endeavor. "Heard you're trying to run cattle solo," old Pete Henderson said, leaning against the counter. "That's ambitious." The way he said ambitious made it sound like foolish. "Someone's got to learn," I replied. "Might as well be me." Pete chuckled, shaking his head. "Cattle are different these days, more skittish, harder to handle, need a firm hand." I wanted to argue, but I kept my mouth shut. I had nothing to prove to Pete Henderson, at least not yet. Back at the ranch, I put my observations into practice. Instead of forcing the cattle to move, I learned to guide them, to work with their natural instincts rather than against them. The weather forecast called for scattered showers, but what rolled in that Tuesday evening was something altogether different. Dark clouds piled up like mountains, and the air grew thick with the promise of violence. I was in the barn when the first drops started falling. Within minutes, those drops became a torrent, drumming against the metal roof. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning illuminated the pastures in stark white flashes. The cattle were scattered across 3 different fields, and storms made them nervous. Nervous cattle did unpredictable things. My father intercepted me in the yard. "You can't go out there alone in this weather. It's too dangerous. The cattle will be fine for one night." But I couldn't shake the image of Boss Lady and her family, huddled in the open field with nowhere to shelter. I waited until my father went inside, then saddled Thunder and headed out into the chaos. The rain came down in sheets, making it almost impossible to see. Thunder picked his way carefully through the mud. Lightning split the sky, revealing glimpses of cattle pressed together near the fence line, their eyes wide with fear. It took 3 hours to move them all to the lower pasture, where the old oak trees provided shelter. By the time I made it back to the barn, I was soaked to the bone and exhausted, but every animal was accounted for. The next morning, my father found me asleep in Thunder's stall, still in my wet clothes. Word of my midnight storm rescue spread through town faster than gossip at a church social. Suddenly, the same people who had been skeptical were calling me brave, maybe even a little crazy. "Heard you rode out in that storm Tuesday night," Sarah Martinez said when I stopped by the hardware store. She was the local veterinarian and one of the few people who had always treated me as an equal. "Cattle needed moving," I said. "Couldn't leave them out there." Most folks would have, including some who've been ranching longer than you've been alive. That afternoon, Sarah showed up at the ranch with her medical bag and an offer to check on my cattle at a reduced rate. It was the first time a business owner in town had treated me like a real rancher. The validation felt good, but it also brought pressure. Now people were watching, waiting to see if my storm heroics were a fluke. Every decision I made was scrutinized, every success or failure noted and discussed. I tried to block out the noise and focus on the work. The cattle were thriving under my care, their coats glossy and their weight steady. I'd implemented a new rotation system that gave the grass time to recover, and the pastures looked better than they had in years. But success with cattle was only part of the equation. To really prove myself, I needed to prove I could handle the business side too. The county livestock auction happened every third Saturday, and it was where reputations were made or broken. I'd been attending since I was tall enough to see over the railings, but always as an observer. Now it was my turn. I loaded 20 head of my best cattle into the trailer early that Saturday morning, double-checking the paperwork and trying to calm my nerves. These weren't just cattle anymore. They were my credibility, my future, everything compressed into one morning. The loading dock buzzed with activity. Ranchers I'd known all my life unloaded their animals, exchanging casual conversation that came from decades of shared experience. I felt like an outsider looking in. "Morning," I nodded to Jim Crawford, whose ranch bordered ours. He looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Didn't expect to see you here selling on your own." I swallowed my irritation and focused on getting my cattle into the holding pens. The auctioneer, Bobby Chen, had been calling livestock sales for over 20 years. When he saw my cattle in pen number 7, he did a double take. "Those your cattle?" "Yes, sir." He walked closer, examining the animals with a practiced eye. My heart hammered while he checked their condition. "Good weight on them," he said finally. "Clean coats. You been feeding them something special?" "Just good grass and attention." He nodded slowly, making notes. "We'll see how they do." The auction started at 10 sharp, and my cattle were scheduled for the third lot. I found a spot in the bleachers where I could see both the ring and the buyers. Lot number 3, 20 head of mixed steers from the Johnson Ranch. My mouth went dry. This was it. My cattle filed into the ring and I held my breath. They looked good under the bright lights. Healthy, well-proportioned. Boss Lady's son, a young bull I'd been particularly proud of, led the group with confidence. "Opening bid at $850 per head," Chen called out. A hand went up, then another. The bidding climbed steadily. $875, $900, $925. I tried to look calm, but inside I was calculating profits. $950, do I hear $975? The bidding slowed. $9.50 was better than I'd dared hope. But then, something unexpected happened. Marcus Webb, the biggest cattle buyer in 3 counties, raised his hand. $9.75 to Webb Cattle Company, Chen announced. Another hand shot up. $10, $10.25. The bidding war I'd only dreamed about was happening right in front of me. When the gavel finally fell at $10.75 per head, I had to grip the bleacher rail to keep from falling over. It was the highest price of the day. Marcus Webb found me in the parking lot as I was loading my empty trailer. "Nice cattle," he said simply. "You got more like those?" Word of my successful auction spread through the county like wildfire. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with calls from ranchers, suppliers, and buyers wanting to know when my next sale would be. My father's attitude shifted too, though he tried to hide it behind gruff congratulations. "One good sale doesn't make a rancher," he said. "It's what you do next that counts." He was right. The pressure was on to prove my success wasn't just beginner's luck. I threw myself into the work with renewed energy, expanding my operation and refining my methods. The key was attention to detail. While other ranchers managed their herds like commodities, I treated each animal as an individual investment. I tracked their weights, monitored their health, and adjusted their diets based on market projections. Sarah Martinez became a regular visitor, helping me implement a preventive health program. Other ranchers started asking questions about my methods, and I found myself giving advice to men who had been working cattle since before I was born. "You're doing something different," Jim Crawford admitted one afternoon. "My cattle don't look like this." It wasn't magic, it was simply caring enough to do the work right. But in a business where many people cut corners, doing things right was apparently revolutionary. By fall, I had contracts with 2 major buyers and a waiting list of customers who wanted my cattle specifically. The ranch that everyone said I couldn't handle alone was now producing some of the finest beef in the county. Success brought opportunities, but also difficult decisions. Marcus Webb approached me in November with an offer that would change everything. He wanted to contract my entire next year's production, but only if I could double my herd size. "You've proven you can raise quality cattle," he said. "Now the question is whether you can scale up without losing that quality." Doubling the herd meant buying more land, building new facilities, and taking on debt that would either set me up for life or bankrupt me. My family had opinions, naturally. "It's too much too fast," my uncle warned. "You've had one good year. Don't bet everything on being able to repeat it." I'd been thinking about financing for weeks. The bank would loan against the ranch, but putting the family land at risk felt like betrayal. The answer came from Jim Crawford. He stopped by one evening with a proposition. "I've been watching what you're doing," he said. "I'm thinking about retiring. You interested in a partnership?" His ranch was adjacent to ours, with prime grazing land and excellent water access. Combined with our property, it would give me the space I needed without crushing debt. "I'll provide the land, you provide the expertise," he continued. "We split profits 50-50 for 5 years, then you can buy me out." It was the opportunity I'd been looking for, but it also meant taking on a partner who might have different ideas about running the operation. Working with Jim Crawford turned out to be both easier and harder than expected. Easier because he genuinely wanted to learn my methods. Harder because he questioned everything, forcing me to explain every decision. "Why are you moving them to that pasture?" he'd ask, or "What's the reasoning behind changing their feed schedule?" His constant questions irritated me at first, but gradually I realized he was making me a better rancher, forcing me to think through decisions instead of relying on instinct alone. The expanded operation presented new challenges. Managing 400 head wasn't just twice as hard, it was exponentially more complex. Feed schedules became critical, health monitoring required systematic tracking, and the margin for error shrank dramatically. I hired 2 part-time workers, young men from town who needed jobs. Teaching them reminded me how much I'd learned. Things that seemed obvious now, reading cattle behavior, timing pasture rotations, recognizing illness, were skills I'd developed through trial and error. "The cattle trust you," one worker, Danny, observed, as we moved a group to new grazing. "They don't fight you like they do most people. Trust. That was the key word I'd been looking for. The cattle trusted me because I'd proven reliable and consistent. I fed them on time, moved them to good grass, and kept them healthy. In return, they cooperated instead of fighting. The same principle applied to my business relationships. Marcus Webb trusted me to deliver quality cattle on schedule. Jim Crawford trusted me to manage our partnership fairly. Building that trust had taken time and consistency, but it was becoming the foundation of everything I'd accomplished. Spring brought the kind of late freeze that could devastate a cattle operation if you weren't prepared. Jim Crawford and I spent 2 days moving cattle to sheltered areas and ensuring water sources wouldn't freeze. "Your grandfather used to say that ranching was 10% cattle knowledge and 90% weather prediction," Jim told me as we checked on the last group. I never understood what he meant until now. The freeze lasted 3 days, but we didn't lose a single animal. Other ranchers weren't so lucky. Pete Henderson lost 12 head, and 2 smaller operations had to sell off cattle they couldn't afford to feed. Sarah Martinez stopped by during the worst of it to check our preparations. "You're thinking like a rancher now," she said. "Not just managing for good times, but planning for the worst." That resilience became my trademark. While other operations struggled with seasonal challenges, I was building systems that could handle whatever nature threw at us. Drought preparedness, flood management, disease prevention, every aspect was designed with contingencies in mind. Other ranchers started asking for advice about weather preparedness and risk management. I found myself invited to speak at county agricultural extension meetings. "The thing about sustainable ranching," I told a group of fellow cattlemen, "is that it's not just about this year's profits. It's about building an operation that can thrive for decades." Some nodded in agreement, others looked skeptical, but the results spoke for themselves. The letter from the State Agricultural Department arrived on a Tuesday morning, announcing that our ranch had been selected for the Sustainable Farming Excellence Award. The award ceremony was in the state capital, with media coverage and speeches from agricultural officials. It felt surreal. 2 years ago, my own family didn't think I could handle the ranch alone, and now state officials were recognizing our operation as a model. My parents came to the ceremony, pride and bewilderment mixed in equal measure on their faces. My father shook hands with the agricultural commissioner and listened as officials praised the innovative methods his child had implemented. "Never thought I'd see the day," he whispered. "Your grandfather would be proud." But with recognition came responsibility. The agricultural department wanted to use our ranch as a demonstration site. Extension agents brought groups of ranchers to tour our facilities. I found myself teaching workshops and writing articles for farming magazines. Marcus Webb's contracts kept coming, prices staying high as word spread about our cattle quality. We were now supplying beef to restaurants in 3 states, and my waiting list grew longer each month. "You've built something special here," Webb told me during one visit. "But more important, you've built it the right way." The ranch that everyone said I couldn't handle alone was now supplying cattle to half the county and serving as a model for sustainable agriculture statewide. The day I signed the contract to buy Jim Crawford's share of our partnership was one of those perfect autumn afternoons when the light turns everything golden. Jim was officially retiring, moving to town to be closer to his grandchildren. "You don't need much consulting anymore," he said, watching me review the paperwork. You've become the teacher instead of the student." It was true, though I hadn't fully realized it until he said it. Young ranchers now came to me with questions. Agricultural extension agents asked me to review their educational materials. Even some old-timers who had initially been skeptical now sought my opinion. My operation now employed 4 full-time workers and supplied premium beef to buyers across the region. The sustainable practices I'd implemented weren't just good for the environment, they were profitable, proving that doing the right thing and doing well financially weren't mutually exclusive. Sarah Martinez stopped by that evening to congratulate me on the partnership buyout. "Remember when you were worried about moving 20 head to a holding pen?" she asked. "That felt impossible at the time," I admitted. "Now it seems like the easiest thing in the world. That's what experience does. It makes the impossible feel routine." Standing in my pasture at sunset, watching 400 head of cattle graze peacefully, I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he used to say that ranching wasn't a job, it was a calling. The young woman who showed up at my gate one morning reminded me of myself 3 years ago, determined but uncertain, carrying the weight of family expectations and personal dreams. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she'd just graduated from agricultural college. "I heard you might need help during calving season," she said, trying to sound confident. I hired her on the spot. Training Elena reminded me how much I'd learned. The techniques that were now second nature, reading cattle behavior, timing interventions, managing rotational grazing, had to be explained step by step. "The key is patience," I told her as we worked with stubborn heifers. "Cattle will do what you want, but only if you give them time to understand." Now, she was a quick learner, asking thoughtful questions and making connections between theory and practice. Within a month, she was handling routine tasks with minimal supervision. "You're a natural teacher," she told me one afternoon. "Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" Agricultural colleges were starting to request guest lectures. Extension services wanted me to develop curriculum for sustainable ranching programs. There was a whole generation of young farmers who needed practical hands-on education, but teaching meant spending less time with my cattle, and that felt like abandoning the foundation of everything I'd built. "Maybe someday," I said. "Right now, I'm still learning myself." 5 years after that first morning when I announced I was taking the North Pasture, I stood in the same kitchen, looking out at the same view. But everything had changed. The ranch now covered 3,000 acres, employed 8 full-time workers, and supplied premium beef to buyers in 6 states. My father, now in his 70s, had gradually shifted from skeptic to advisor to cheerleader. He spent most mornings at the ranch, not because I needed him to, but because he enjoyed being part of something successful. "Never thought I'd see the day when buyers would drive 300 miles just to look at our cattle," he said. "Your grandfather would be amazed." The latest recognition had come from the National Cattlemen's Association, which featured our ranch in their annual sustainability report. It was the kind of national attention that most ranchers only dreamed about. But the achievement I was most proud of wasn't awards or contracts. It was Elena Rodriguez, who had just signed a lease agreement to start her own operation on adjacent land. She'd spent 2 years learning our methods and was now ready to prove herself. "Nervous?" I asked her as she prepared for her first independent cattle auction. "Terrified," she admitted, "but excited too. Thank you for believing in me when nobody else would." That evening, as I made my final rounds through the pastures, I thought about how far we'd all come. The cattle moved peacefully in the fading light, content and healthy. My workers were heading home to their families. Elena was probably lying awake somewhere, planning her next day as a ranch owner. The ranch would continue to grow and evolve. New challenges would arise, requiring new solutions. Young people would come seeking opportunities to learn and prove themselves. The cycle would continue, each generation building on what came before. Standing there in the quiet evening, surrounded by the results of hard work and determination, I finally understood what success really meant. It wasn't just about proving doubters wrong or building a profitable business. It was about creating something sustainable that could benefit your community, your industry, and the people who would come after you. The family that once doubted I could run cattle alone now worked alongside me in an operation that supplied beef to buyers across the country. The impossible had become inevitable through persistence, learning, and unwavering belief that determination could overcome doubt. As I walked back toward the house, I could already hear my phone starting to ring with tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. But for tonight, I was content to be exactly where I belonged. On the land my grandfather had claimed, surrounded by cattle that trusted me to care for them, building a legacy that would outlast us all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of determination, family, and following your dreams despite the odds. It means the world to know that you took the time to hear about this journey from doubt to success. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Please write in the comments below and let me know what part of the world you're listening from. Are you in a small farming community like the one in our story, or are you listening from a big city? Your stories and perspectives make this community so much richer. If you enjoyed this tale of perseverance and would like to hear more inspiring stories about people who refuse to give up on their dreams, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more content about real people doing extraordinary things. Until next time, remember that the people who say you can't do something are usually just afraid to try it themselves. Keep pushing forward, keep believing in yourself, and never let anyone else define what's possible for your life. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.